My name is Emma Carter, and I want to tell you about the day I found out the man I was about to marry had been lying to me for 7 years. We were standing at the altar, halfway through our vows, when Daniel Reyes reached into his jacket pocket. I honestly thought he was reaching for the ring. Instead, he pulled out a navy folder and turned toward the front row, where his mother, Linda, sat with her hands pressed against her chest like she already knew what was coming. "Before I finish my vows," Daniel said, "there's one more promise I want to make today. And I want everyone here to witness it." 220 guests went silent. "My father left when I was young," he said, his voice cracking right on cue. "My mother raised me alone. She worked 2 jobs. She emptied her retirement account so I could finish law school. Everything I have started with what she sacrificed for me." Linda pressed a tissue to her mouth. Someone in the second row was already crying. Daniel looked straight at her. "So this week I updated my estate plan. If anything ever happens to me, the house on Cedar Grove Lane goes to my mother. No matter what happens in my life, I need to know she will always have a home." The room erupted into applause. A woman behind me whispered, "Now that's a good son." I stood there holding my bouquet so tightly the stems cut into my palms. Because the house on Cedar Grove Lane was worth $1.35 million. And every dollar of it had come from the inheritance my parents left me after they died. Daniel hadn't just given away his house. He had stood in front of everyone I loved and called it his alone. His estate, his plan, his sacrifice. For about 2 seconds I wasn't even angry. I was just confused. Then one question pushed everything else out of my mind. Why did Daniel believe he had the right to decide what happened to a house that wasn't fully his? How it started. 3 years earlier, my parents had died in a highway accident. For months I could barely function, let alone handle insurance claims, probate paperwork, bank transfers, and a house closing. Daniel was a corporate attorney, mergers, acquisitions, contracts. The kind of person who could read 40 pages of legal language without blinking. So he took over everything I couldn't handle. He sat with me in the hospital hallway the night we turned off my mother's machines. He helped me box up my father's office. He answered the calls from insurance adjusters when I couldn't stop crying long enough to speak. And when I decided to use part of my inheritance to buy a house, he handled that too. "It's smarter to put it under an LLC," he told me one night, laptop open on his knees. Asset protection. Sounds complicated, but it isn't. We'll each own 50% of the company. The company owns the house. We own the company. Same result, cleaner paperwork. I asked him twice if that meant the house would still belong to both of us. He smiled and kissed my forehead. "Emma, I'm your fiancé. I'm not opposing counsel." I trusted him because during the worst year of my life, his favorite sentence had been, "Give it to me. You've carried enough." Now I watched him hug his mother while 200 people clapped for his generosity, and for the first time in 3 years, I wondered exactly what I had handed him. "I need to fix my makeup." The officiant smiled, trying to steer us back on track. "And now the rings." I didn't move. "I'm sorry," I said. "I need 5 minutes to fix my makeup." Daniel blinked. "Right now?" I lifted my dress and walked off the platform before he could argue. Inside the bridal suite, I locked the door and called a number I hadn't used in almost 2 years. Susan Hale, my father's old estate attorney. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Emma, aren't you supposed to be getting married right now?" I stared at myself in the mirror. My makeup was flawless. My hands were shaking. "Susan, I need you to check something. The house on Cedar Grove. I need to know exactly whose name is on it." Silence. "Then why are you asking me this right now?" "Because Daniel just stood up in the middle of our wedding and announced that if he dies, the house goes to his mother." The silence stretched longer this time. When Susan spoke again, all the warmth was gone from her voice. "Emma, do not sign anything else today. I'm pulling the old file. Stay on the line." I slipped the phone into my clutch without hanging up, and walked back into the ballroom. The wedding is over. Daniel was standing by the altar, telling guests I'd had a makeup emergency. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. He reached for my hand. I walked past him and took the microphone from the officiant. "Thank you all for coming," I said. The room quieted. "We'll be returning every gift and check after today. Dinner is already paid for, so please stay and enjoy yourselves if you'd like." Daniel's smile vanished. I looked at him once. But the wedding is over. For 3 full seconds nobody breathed. Then the room exploded into noise. Daniel crossed the floor and grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to make his point. "We're talking. Now." He pulled me into a side room and shut the door. The moment it clicked shut, the polished groom disappeared. "What the hell are you doing? Canceling our wedding over an estate plan? Over the fact that you just told 200 people you're giving away a house my parents paid for?" "I didn't give her the house. It only matters if I die." "Then answer one question," I said. "Whose name is on the ownership records?" He looked at the door instead of at me. "My partners are out there. Clients are out there. Half my mother's family flew in for this. Do you really need to do this today?" I almost laughed. "You had no problem discussing ownership when you were telling a room full of people you had $1 million house to give away. The numbers don't add up." The door opened. Linda stood there, tissue balled in one hand, eyes red. "This is my fault," she said softly. "I told Daniel once that getting older scares me. That I worry I won't have anywhere to go. I never asked him to give me your house. If I've ruined your wedding, Emma, I'll have to live with that." It sounded gracious. The door stayed open the whole time she said it. Within a minute, Daniel's aunt and half a dozen relatives had gathered in the hallway. One of them lowered her voice like she was being reasonable. "Emma, maybe finish the ceremony and sort the paperwork out tomorrow. Canceling a wedding is a very big decision. Nobody called me selfish. Nobody said I was wrong. They didn't have to." Every sentence carried the same message. "Swallow it, don't embarrass Daniel, don't make a scene." I'd been hearing that message in different forms for 7 years. I turned to Linda. "Do you know where the money for Cedar Grove came from?" She frowned. "Of course. Daniel bought it." "Are you sure?" "Daniel makes very good money," she said, almost offended. "He can afford his own house." "Mom, stop," Daniel snapped. "Too late." I turned to him. "Very good money." He pulled out his phone instead of answering, pulling up documents. "You want to know who owns the house? Fine." He showed me the LLC filing. Reyes Residential Holdings, sole member Daniel Reyes. Then the closing statement, same company as buyer. Then a wire confirmation for $1,350,000, sender, Daniel Reyes. "Every official record," he said, "shows the money came from my account, and my company bought the property. You transferred funds into the house account. You signed the funding authorization. You don't get to call it theft 3 years later because you're angry on our wedding day." My stomach dropped because I remembered signing that. I remembered it too well. "I'm not your opposing lawyer." 10 months after my parents died, I was still waking up some nights convinced my phone had rung with one of their voices on the line. Daniel sat beside me on the couch with his laptop, walking me through a stack of documents. I'd stopped on one page. "The LLC is still 50-50, right?" He'd given me that same patient smile. "Emma, I'm your fiancé. I'm not your opposing lawyer." So I'd signed. Now, watching the color drain from my face, Daniel softened his voice. "This is why I didn't want to do this in front of everyone. It's more complicated than you think." Linda exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. I knew Daniel would never take advantage of anyone. She reached for my arm. "Emma, you're about to be married. Couples can't treat every dollar like a courtroom exhibit." I pulled away. Then I asked Daniel one more question. "How much did you make last year?" His expression shifted instantly. "What does that have to do with the house? Answer me." Linda frowned. "Why are you asking about his salary?" I looked at her. "Because Daniel told me his take-home pay was about $6,000 a month." The words came out of Linda before she could stop them. 6,000. His bonus alone was over 100,000 last year. How could he only make 6,000 a month? The hallway went dead silent. "How much?" I asked again. Daniel's eyes dropped. "Around 430,000. Someone in the hallway audibly gasped. 3 years of lies. For 3 years, Daniel had built a monthly budget around $6,000 in take-home pay. He transferred $5,500 into our household account and joked that he kept only $500 for himself. I thought it was romantic. I thought he was giving everything he had for our future. So I paid off his car loan when he said cash was tight. I covered $42,000 in repairs on Linda's house because Daniel said he couldn't help her without going into debt. I canceled a trip to Portugal with my college friends after he said money was too stressful that year. He held me that night and said, "When things get easier, I'll make it up to you." Apparently things had been easy the entire time. I took my phone out of my clutch. The call timer was still running 36 minutes. I hit speaker. "Susan, did you hear all of that?" For the first time all day, Daniel looked genuinely afraid. "I heard it," Susan said, calm and clear through the phone. "The original $1.35 million for Cedar Grove came from a separate inheritance account funded by the Carter Family Trust. I just pulled the distribution record." Daniel forced a laugh. "Source of funds isn't title. Emma signed the authorization." "I know," Susan said. "Which is why I'm not telling anyone in that room the property legally belongs to Emma today. What I am saying is that I found the original operating agreement draft for Reyes Residential Holdings. It lists two members, Emma Carter 50%, Daniel Reyes 50%. I also found an email from the closing attorney asking Daniel whether Emma had confirmed she was giving up her membership. Emma was never copied on that email. Nobody in the hallway spoke. The ring on the table. "Emma," Daniel said quietly, "we can fix this. If you want your interest added back, we can redo the estate plan. I'll draft a prenup tonight." I stared at him. He still thought this was a paperwork problem. "I'm not canceling this wedding because you wanted your mother protected," I said. "I'm canceling it because today I found out I don't know the man I was about to marry." I pulled the ring off my finger and set it on the small table beside us. "For 7 years you told me you were barely getting by. I believed you. You told me the ownership structure was complicated. I believed you. You told me the LLC belonged to both of us. I believed that too." He opened his mouth. I didn't let him speak. "Your greatest skill was never law, Daniel. It was deciding exactly how much truth I got to see." I walked out. 200 people watched me cross the ballroom floor. This time I didn't explain anything. I changed into the pantsuit I'd packed for the reception exit, handed the gift table sheet to the venue manager, and left through a side door. Daniel called 41 times that night. I didn't answer once. Finding the money. The next morning, Susan showed up at my hotel with 2 coffees and a laptop. She didn't ask if I still loved him. She just opened the files and said, "First we find your money." My inheritance had gone into a joint house account. 2 weeks later, the exact same amount had moved from that joint account into Daniel's personal account. Then from his personal account straight to escrow, the same wire he'd waved around at the wedding as proof he'd bought the house. On paper, Daniel paid for the house. In reality, my money had traveled from my account to our joint account to his personal account, and only then to escrow. He hadn't created a single dollar. He created a paper trail that started with his name on it. The earliest LLC agreement matched what I remembered 50-50. The final, executed version in the closing file listed only Daniel. I had never signed that version. I'd signed a funding authorization that referenced a final agreement I was never shown. I dug through our old messages and found it. 2 days before closing, I'd written, "Please make sure the final LLC is 50-50. I don't want a paperwork issue becoming a problem later." Daniel's reply, sent less than a minute after, "Of course. You don't need to worry about this stuff." That was the moment I understood the pattern. Daniel hadn't woken up one day and decided to steal a house. He'd tested, little by little, exactly how much I'd let him control without ever checking. Each step alone looked harmless. Together, they built a life I never actually agreed to. What else was hiding? Over the next few days I went through our shared cloud storage myself. Not looking for a confession, just done letting other people decide what I was allowed to read. I found his student loan payoff statement dated 4 years earlier. For 3 straight years he told me his loans were the reason he couldn't save aggressively. They'd already been gone. I found 3 separate investment accounts I never knew existed, worth over $900,000 combined. One listed Linda as beneficiary. I found a purchase receipt for a condo in Linda's home state. $280,000 paid in cash from his own income. If Daniel made over $400,000 a year, had nearly $1 million invested, and could buy his mother a condo outright, why did he need my inheritance at all? Why turn our house into an asset he owned alone? Why let me believe he brought home $6,000 a month? I found the answer buried in a personal goals document he'd written 3 years earlier. Most of it was ordinary. Run a half marathon, make senior associate, fully fund mom's retirement. Then one line at the bottom, formatted differently, like something he never meant anyone else to read. Never be the guy everyone says married into money. Suddenly a dozen old memories rearranged themselves. The awkward silence after my father asked about his law school debt. The way he refused my dad's offer to make an introduction at a top firm. The way he said no the second my mother offered to help with a future house. I'll give Emma a home myself. I'd thought it was pride. I'd even admired it. Now I understood. Daniel didn't mind using my money. He minded anyone ever finding out he had. The meeting. 10 days after the wedding, Daniel came to Susan's office without a lawyer. The first thing he asked was, "How much did you find?" "Enough," Susan said. I slid the printed goals document across the table. His face went white. When I was a kid, he finally said, "Everyone treated my mother like she was asking for something. In law school, people found out about your family and the way they looked at me changed. Nobody said it out loud. They didn't have to. As long as I was with you, I felt like I had to prove I'd built my own life. So you used my money to prove you didn't need my money," I said. He shut his eyes. I know how that sounds. Doesn't sound ridiculous. Sounds cruel. I leaned forward. The thing you couldn't tolerate wasn't depending on me. It was anyone knowing you depended on me. He offered to transfer the entire house back to me. Disclose everything. Redo the finances. 7 years weren't fake, Emma. That sentence hurt more than I expected because a part of me still wanted to believe it. Maybe he had loved me. Love just doesn't cancel out a lie. "I believe you loved me," I said. Hope flickered in his face. "But I don't trust the world I saw when I was with you anymore." The fallout. A month later, Daniel's firm opened an internal review, not because I reported him, but because Susan discovered a junior associate had helped draft the operating agreement years earlier using firm resources, without a conflict check, and without disclosing that the purchase funds primarily came from my inheritance. Real life doesn't play out like TV. No one marched him out in handcuffs. He didn't lose his license. But the firm pulled him from 2 major client matters while they investigated, and a sentence started circulating through the office. That house he always said he bought himself? The money came from his fiancé's parents. It was the exact fact he had spent years trying to erase. A few months later he resigned. 3 months after the wedding we settled. Daniel transferred full ownership of Rhea's residential holdings to me, and gave up any claim to the house. In exchange, I didn't pursue years of household expenses, and I let the whole thing stay out of public court records. Susan asked twice if I was sure. "There are arguments we haven't even tested." "I know," I said, "but I don't want to spend another year proving I'm entitled to something that was already mine." Cedar Grove. The day the transfer finalized, I went back to the house alone for the first time in months. It still had the dining table we bought for married life. Upstairs, the guest room Linda had already claimed still had the paint color she picked out. I called a real estate agent. "I want to sell." "You've only owned it 3 years," she said, surprised. I looked out at the backyard we'd once argued about filling with hydrangeas. "I bought it," I said. "Not we." It sold 2 months later. I didn't buy something bigger. I didn't move across the country or fall into some whirlwind new romance. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment half the size of Cedar Grove. Every account required my login. I read every document from the first page to the last. 6 months later, Daniel sent one final email. One sentence. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I didn't need anyone, and I pushed away the person who was most willing to stand beside me." I didn't reply. I didn't feel triumphant either. I archived it and went back to my coffee. Everyone at that wedding thought I walked away because Daniel wanted to leave a house to his mother. That was never really why. The estate plan was just the first crack that let me see the entire life he'd been quietly building without me in the driver's seat. In his version of our story, he was completely self-made. The house was his. The money was his. The decisions were his. My only job was to trust him and stay quiet. So in the end, I didn't just get a house back. I got back the right to decide what was mine, what was true, and what kind of life I actually wanted to live next. If this story hit you the way it hit me, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this one, and let me know in the comments, would you have walked away at the altar? Or waited until after the wedding?